I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, a record-breaking operation at sea, seizing 28,000 pounds of cocaine. How this drug bust hurts cartels on the other side of the border.
More than 14% of people living in San Diego County experience food insecurity. I'm Peggy Pico with this year's Map the Meal Gap report and what's being done to deal with hunger in our own neighborhoods. Then, my conversation with a man who survived 2 Nazi gas chambers, how he survived and why he's sharing his story today.
We're covering an explosion in downtown Oklahoma City this morning.
It was an attack that shook the nation and redefined domestic terrorism, marking the 20th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. An illegal drug operation thwarted on the border. More than $400 million worth of cocaine seized in a record-breaking operation. Authorities in San Diego say in the past 6 months they stopped more drugs than all of last year. KPBS reporter Matt Bowler has the latest on this drug bust.
The crew of the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Boutwell shows off cocaine they've intercepted after 79 days at sea, returning with more than 28,000 pounds of cocaine worth over $424 million. It's one thing to say you've seized 28,000 pounds of cocaine, but it's completely other to actually see it in person. The Coast Guard didn't do it alone. Federal law enforcement, along with U.S. and Canadian navies, all played major roles. Just one of the seizures amounted to 5,274 kilograms of cocaine. That's more than 11,000 pounds. U.S. Attorney Laura Duffy says big busts like these have a big impact on the international war on drugs.
The seizures of these kind of record-breaking amounts of cocaine means that there are tens of thousands of pounds that aren't making their way to the street, and there are literally billions of dollars that are not making their way into cartel coffers.
6 months into this fiscal year, the Coast Guard and the International Coalition have stopped more than 56,000 pounds of cocaine worth over $848 million. Compare that to all of last year's seizures of 53,000 pounds worth $805 million. Captain Edward Westfall credits his crew for their mission success.
Searching for a floating bale of cocaine on a dark night in the ocean from a small boat is a daunting task, and they do that successfully. So it's really a testimony to them.
Even on the open sea, far from port, Westfall says this work hits home.
Although it may be several hundred to several thousand miles away, that with especially today in the day of globalization, that really is our doorstep nonetheless.
Matt Bowler, KPBS News.
New calls tonight to speed up construction of water storage facilities from Republican lawmakers in the state capitol. They say they're responding to the state's drought emergency. The Assembly members introduced a water storage bill as part of a legislative package. It wants local governments to remove environmental roadblocks that hold up construction. The goal is to expand water storage and increase water supply. It would also streamline California's Environmental Quality Act to expedite construction on these projects.
In this drought, it's been terrible for our economy. It's put a whole lot of farm workers and agriculturalists out of work because we don't have the water to grow our food that feeds the world. And so I've introduced legislation to get these water storage projects off the ground as quickly as possible. It will streamline the environmental process, the California Environmental Quality Act, to allow these projects to move faster.
Another bill would modify the way litigation is brought against proposed housing projects. It's in response to a recent government report that said government policy makes it difficult to meet the housing demands of coastal communities. On the Environment Desk tonight, researchers hope one of San Diego's last remaining coastal wetlands helps them understand the potential impact of climate change. KPBS Environment reporter Eric Anderson says they're looking at how a complex biological system is coping.
The Tijuana Estuary Visitor Center sits on the northern edge of a sweeping flat valley. The land is wedged between suburban housing tracts, the international border, the ocean, and a military base. Helicopters rumble overhead as inexperienced pilots train here. That military mission is one reason this area is protected from development. Refuge manager Brian Collins says this is one of the few coastal wetlands to survive in California.
As wetlands have been developed throughout California, we've lost, and the world actually, we've lost a lot of the potential for those wetlands to function ecologically, not only for the species that live in those wetlands, but for us as well.
Collins sees a dynamic, living ecological system that has positive, real-world impacts on the surrounding environment.
If you like clean water at your beaches, you really want estuaries to be able to help clean that water as it comes down the watersheds. So in many ways, this system, this valley, is a microcosm of the world's environmental problems and challenges and solutions.
This salt marsh habitat is considered a coastal wetland, even though parts of it dry out during the year. There are long, sandy strips of land. Cactus are as common here as mudflats. The variety is a sign that things are constantly in flux. Collins says what was once a mudflat might now be something else. He points out a damp spit of land.
The system has changed, it's seceded into vegetated salt marsh. Today, it's great rail habitat.
Ridgeway rails are endangered birds. They have long legs and long beaks that allow them to thrive in the tall grass that grows on the edge of mudflats. They're among more than 300 species of birds that find their way to the estuary. And while change is a part of the ecosystem, dramatic change can be devastating.
Well, we've thought a lot about how climate change, and particularly sea level rise, is going to affect our coastal wetlands.
Jeff Crooks is a research coordinator at the estuary. He says the salt marsh is a lot like a large lung, breathing in and then exhaling ocean water. Crooks says the system has to be constantly measured to be understood.
Basically, what we do is we say we're taking the pulse of the estuary, we're taking the vital signs. You just go out and measure day after day.
Those daily checks have created reams of data. Researchers track everything from water temperature to acidification, and even how salty the water is in the marsh.
Right, so salinity, the amount of salt in the water, is basically the primary determinant of the plants and animals that live in the system and the types of things that you'll see here.
Saltier water might completely change what can grow here. Crooks is scouring those research logs to see what the immediate past says about the future. Emily Young works with the San Diego Foundation, and she says climate change is why her organization is funding the study.
We know that our coastal wetlands play a vital role in buffering the impact of storms and filtering pollutants and providing outdoor recreation, nurseries for fisheries. So it's really important to understand how these areas are changing.
It is especially valuable to understand how quickly the change is happening or how dramatic the change ends up being. Researchers say it carries implications for the rest of the region. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
The public will have a chance to learn about security options at the now shuttered San Onofre nuclear plant in the North County. Southern California Edison is hosting a meeting tonight in San Juan Capistrano. The utility proposes to bury tons of highly radioactive waste at San Onofre, but wants a safer place to store it in the future. A panel chairman says the federal government has failed to find long-term storage, but private companies have proposed storage sites in Utah and Texas. There are calls for local governments to lobby the state to help find an interim storage site away from populated areas. A bill on vaccination waivers for children drew passionate testimony today from hundreds of people, including this little girl at the state capitol.
My name is Vine. I'm from California. I want to go to kindergarten.
She was among those who blasted the bill during today's hearing. The measure would require parents to vaccinate their children as a condition of enrolling them in school. Critics say vaccines pose a health risk for children injured by them. Supporters say unvaccinated children pose a health risk, citing recent outbreaks of whooping cough and measles.
So we're here today, obviously, because if this passes without any input from our citizens, then it's going to go from California to the next state and to the next state and so on. The whole United States will have forced vaccination. So it has to stop here.
Because I believe that in 2015, children shouldn't have to be at risk of preventable disease. The fact that some people buy into claims that are against the evidence and deny the children protection from disease is sad. But sending those children to school where they risk others and reduce herd immunity that protects everyone is even sadder.
The vote on the bill was postponed until next week. Taking a look at how hunger has San Diego County, a new study shows 1 in 7 people don't know where their next meal is coming from. Peggy Pico finds out why and what's being done about it.
Feeding America, a national nonprofit, reports 435,000 people in San Diego County experience food insecurity. Joining me with a reality check on hunger in our region are my guest, Feeding America's Executive Director, Karen Herron, and Program Director, Jenny Senora. Welcome.
Thank you.
Karen, how do you define food insecurity and why don't you call it hunger?
Well, we define food insecurity as it's actually people experiencing hunger, but what food insecurity means is that they may have food today or have a meal today, but not know where the next meal is coming from, or there's not enough food for everyone in the family to eat, so somebody in that family is skipping meals so other members can have a meal.
So it sounds like a broader definition, Jenny, but I understand the report found that overall San Diego's doing a little better than last year when it comes to food insecurity. However, numbers here are still hovering around the state numbers, about 15%. Is that correct?
Exactly, yeah.
What are some of the contributing reasons why we're having food insecurity here in San Diego County?
So there's 3 different main reasons that we can talk about. The first one is what we call self-sufficiency wages. So a lot of the families that we serve are working, but the wages aren't necessarily high enough to make ends meet. That goes to the second reason of the high cost of living in San Diego. So you can imagine the cost of housing is a huge contributor. And finally, the high cost of food. It's a lot easier to get cheap, unhealthy food in the county, but to get access to, nutritious food is a lot more difficult.
And I understand there's some other contributing factors too. I understand 26% of people who are food insecure aren't eligible for national programs?
Yeah, so what that means is that 26%, their incomes might be a little bit higher than what would help them qualify for federal nutrition programs like SNAP or locally known as CalFresh. So their incomes might be a tiny bit higher, but they're not able to access a food assistance program.
And as you mentioned, the average cost of a meal here is higher than it is nationally. And also I understand we have a district here, the 51st Congressional District is the highest in the county?
Yeah, they have a rate of about 15% in food insecurity in that area. This is also rural areas of the county like Jacumba are struggling with food insecurity here in San Diego County.
Right, that 51st District, so just so people know, is kind of from National City, Imperial Beach over to Imperial County. Speaking of Imperial County, Karen, the situation is worse there. How come?
It actually is worse in Imperial County. Part of the reason is it's very high unemployment there, higher than in the San Diego County. And we also see there's more food deserts or lack of access to good nutritious food. So it's really compounded there. There's more children and more people experiencing hunger there.
And some people might be surprised at that because we know that Imperial County also suffers from a large number of people who are obese. How does that relate to having food insecurity and yet a high obesity rate?
It is kind of a paradox, but what we know is that good nutritious food isn't always available to low-income people, and so what they do is resort to calorie-dense food. It's inexpensive, but it may not be the most nutritious. And so we see that 1/3 of all the families that receive food assistance through Feeding America San Diego have chronic health issues. Obesity and diabetes top amongst them.
Mm-hmm. And Jenny, how many meals does Feeding America actually serve in San Diego and Imperial counties?
So we distribute 21 million meals annually, and we're able to reach about 59,000 different children, families, and seniors each week here.
What kind of programs and resources do you offer?
So we have a mobile pantry program that's going out into these rural food deserts that we're talking about to give food to people that have limited access to transportation and grocery stores. We also have a lot of Feeding Kids programs. We work with 32 different schools in 8 different districts to bring food directly to the elementary school, such as our school pantry program, which is a farmers market style distribution where parents themselves come to the school campus and are able to pick up healthy staple items and fresh fruits and vegetables.
And Karen, are these programs free? Is there a certain requirement?
They are free to the clients receiving the assistance. It costs us money to provide those programs, but those who come and receive the food assistance are not paying for that food assistance.
And how do you qualify, Jenny? There
are no eligibility requirements.
I see. How critical would you say, Karen, that these programs are to help put food on the table here in our region?
It's absolutely critical. What we see is many people who suffer with food insecurity, many times it's children who are not eating. Many times it's a parent who's also trying to hold down a job that is not eating. And so it's critical to the health and well-being of our whole community.
All right. Karen Herron and Jenny Señor, thank you so much.
Thank you.
From food to jobs, there's evidence of a dismal job market for college graduates. The Labor Department says job prospects for recent graduates deteriorated slightly last year, with unemployment up 2 points from 2013. Overall, the economy generated more than 3 million jobs last year, the most since 1999. Experts say hiring this spring will be stronger. This weekend marks the 20th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing, one of the largest terrorist attacks on American soil that defined domestic terrorism. On a recent trip to Oklahoma, KPBS video journalist Katie Shula visited the memorial site where the attack killed 169 people and injured hundreds more.
20 years ago Sunday, Timothy McVeigh parked a rental truck right here. At 9:02 a.m., it exploded.
We're covering an explosion in downtown Oklahoma City this morning.
We were trapped, we were buried, but we didn't really know it.
Over there, right behind me, was where the building blew up. About, 168 people were killed, and that's a lot.
Now they're just chairs.
And the little kids have the little chairs for them, and then the grown-ups have the bigger chairs.
When the north wall of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building was blown off, 19 of the 168 victims were young children in the building's daycare center.
Investigators learned
7-year-old Jeffrey Banks was visiting the memorial for the first time. He had to leave the museum before he got through all the exhibits.
If you were in there, you'd probably start to feel sick too. I mean, it's really sad. 168 people killed in one day is a lot.
Oklahoma native Tony White won't forget that day.
It was just heart-wrenching, just wondering, keep your eyes glued to the TV.
How could this happen? All this devastation.
In 2001, Timothy McVeigh was executed for setting off the bomb. His co-conspirator, Terry Nichols, is serving life in prison.
Bracelets, hats, ribbons. I'm sure people that lost loved ones probably come and leave notes.
20 years later, their crimes have changed how White looks at his family every day.
Just innocent people going on about their everyday lives and then, can turn in an instant. So you got to remember, tell everybody you love them when you leave for the day, and you never know.
Katie Shulev, KPBS News.
The 20th anniversary ceremonies will include a memorial 5K race next week. That 7-year-old boy we saw in that will be running in it. Lessons learned from the Holocaust. A Jewish holiday remembers 6 million people killed before and during World War II. The commemoration in San Diego continues this weekend. Peggy Pico talks with one man who survived 2 Nazi gas chambers.
Yom HaShoah is a day observed throughout the world to remember and honor Holocaust victims. One survivor of Nazi death camps was 14 years old when he and his family were seized by Nazis. He spent the next 5 years in 5 different concentration and labor camps and escaped death in gas chambers twice. 89-year-old Lou Dunst, it's my honor to welcome you.
Thank you.
And I'd also like to welcome Heather Wolfson with the Jewish Federation of San Diego County. Welcome to you as well.
Thank you.
Now, Lou, where were you in these gas chambers? And if you wouldn't mind, would you describe what it was like inside?
Well, in Auschwitz, our group did not get to it because we were going to the gas chambers. Something happened, we never did get to the gas chambers in Auschwitz. They sent us to Mauthausen to be gassed, and we were in the gas chamber there, and nothing happened. We were falling down to the floor because we didn't have enough air to breathe, and all of a sudden they took us out of there, and they sent us to Ebensee. We got number 68122. Is my number. I donated that to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and he sent us to a place where we were going to vanish without any cost to the Third Reich. We wound up in the boxcars. That was my number 4 trip in the boxcars, and we were working in Ebensee underground to make missiles to go to Washington, D.C. and New York City. The historians are quoting it as the worst camp, one among the worst camps, and it was bad. Starvation was so bad that we turned to cannibalism.
There was cannibalism in that camp. Now, you said you survived the gas chamber trips because they took you out because they didn't want to spend the fuel or the gas?
Apparently they didn't have it. It was not, they didn't have any longer, it didn't have any more gas. Cyclone B.
Getting back to the camp, both camps actually, was your family there with you? You were just 14 years old when you were first taken.
We were all together until Auschwitz. In Auschwitz we were separated. You go here, you go there. That my mother had to go this way, and my sister. That was the last time I saw my mother.
And how about the rest of your family?
Well, my father was, we were also separated from my father, my brother, and we were separated from our father. We don't know what happened to him, but we can imagine what happened.
What got you through? Maybe there was more than one thing. These 5 horrible years, you're separated from your family, you're being told you're being sent to the gas chambers to die. You know, that doesn't happen. How did you survive?
Hope and faith in God, and I bargained with God. That's why I named my book My Bargain with God. And I did bargain with God constantly because there was no one else that I could talk to.
Heather, the Holocaust was 70 years ago. Why is it important to hear personal stories like Lou's?
We never want to forget, and we also never want it to happen again. By hearing Lou's story and other survivors' story, we ensure that we don't see another Holocaust, and we don't want to see genocide. And in a world today with lots of anti-Semitism and genocide taking place, remembering the Holocaust and telling this story will ensure that we try to not see this happen again.
And Lou, you used to lecture on this, as you said, 3 times a week. That's
correct.
Slowed down a little bit, so we appreciate you telling us now. What do you want people to hear this story, your story, the story of the Holocaust? What do you want them to remember most about it?
I want them to remember, we Jewish people remember things, what happened to us back in Egypt thousands of years ago. This is why we are still here, and we will be here.
Is there anything that you want to tell people, maybe that they see the suffering of other people throughout the world today, whomever they are, they see atrocities happening to others. For somebody who survived that, what do you want to tell them?
Wherever we see people that are struggling and are in trouble, we need to help them. Wherever they are or who they are, we need to help people that need to be helped.
Are you angry about what happened?
There is no anger in my body at all.
How come?
Because if I would carry my anger in my heart, I would die from being angry. So I cannot be angry.
All right, Holocaust survivor.
And I don't hate anybody. I have no hatred to anybody.
That's something to learn from that. Lou Dunst and Heather Wolfson, thank you so much.
The Jewish Federation of San Diego County will host a commemoration this weekend in La Jolla at the Lawrence Family Jewish Community Center on Sunday. The event is free and open to the public.
I'm Gwen Eiffel on the next news hour, Passing the Puck, how NHL players are helping teach inner city youth to break hockey's color lines. That's Thursday on the PBS News Hour.
The Balboa Park Conservancy has hired a new chief executive after a 6-month search. Thomas Herrera Mischler comes from Buffalo, where he ran the Olmsted Parks Conservancy. He'll now be in charge of developing a plan for Balboa Park's many infrastructure needs, including raising money. He starts on July 1st. People who fly drones in California, listen up. There may be new restrictions before takeoff. There's a new bill that would make it illegal to fly a drone with contraband in a prison. Another measure bans drones over school playgrounds without permission. Plus, it would stop anyone from snapping drone photos of a campus during school hours. Supporters say drone technology raises questions about privacy issues. It's shaping up to be a mild spring weekend after a warm day. 70s if you're headed to the beaches over the next few days. We're looking at 80s, then cooling into the 70s for the inland valleys. Sunny with 60s in the mountains, that's the cool spot, and a mix of sun and clouds for the desert. Temperatures there in the 80s and 90s. Of course, you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. You have a great night.